The vast Dakota wilderness was unforgiving in winter. As the deadly blizzard raged, Sarah Miller huddled alone in her remote cabin, miles from the nearest town. But fate had something unexpected in store. That night, she would make a discovery that would change her life forever. A young Lakota boy, barely clinging to life in the snow. What began as an act of compassion would lead to a dawn confrontation that would test the boundaries between two worlds. This is a tale of survival, understanding, and the unexpected bridges formed in the harshest of circumstances. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 1878, Western Dakota Territory. The wind howled like a wounded animal, driving snow against the cabin's sturdy log walls. Sarah Miller stoked the fire, grateful for the warmth as the temperature outside plummeted well below freezing. 3 years. She'd been out here 3 years since she'd left behind the comforts of Philadelphia to stake her claim on this remote stretch of land that most considered uninhabitable. "At least I have you for company," she murmured to her old black Labrador Buck, who lay sprawled by the hearth. The dog raised his graying muzzle, ears perking slightly before settling back down. Sarah was 32 and unmarried, a spinster, by society's harsh judgment. But out here, such distinctions meant little. She had her land, her small herd of cattle in the barn, and enough grit to survive where many men had failed. Her late father's military pension had bought her this plot, and her own determination had kept her alive. The blizzard had descended with little warning that morning, forcing Sarah to rush through feeding her livestock and securing the barn. Now, as darkness fell, she knew they were in for a long night. The supply she'd gathered from Willow Creek 2 weeks prior would last through the winter, assuming the storm didn't collapse her roof or freeze her pipes. Buck suddenly lifted his head again, this time with a low growl rumbling in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Sarah set down her mending and listened. At first, there was nothing but the howling wind, but then a sound, faint, almost lost in the storm. It might have been an animal or a branch scraping against the cabin. But something in Buck's demeanor suggested otherwise. Sarah grabbed her father's old Springfield rifle from above the door, checked that it was loaded, and wrapped her woolen shawl tightly around her shoulders. Buck was already at the door, his nails clicking against the wooden floorboards as he paced anxiously. "Stay," she commanded, though she knew the stubborn dog would follow regardless. The blast of cold air that hit her face when she cracked open the door nearly stole her breath. She squinted against the swirling snow, rifle ready. Buck pushed past her legs and disappeared into the white void. "Buck! Come back here!" Sarah called after him, but her voice was swallowed by the storm. Cursing under her breath, she pulled her scarf over her mouth and stepped outside, closing the door behind her to keep the precious heat in. The snow was already knee-deep and falling fast. Sarah could barely see 3 feet ahead, but Buck's dark shape was visible as he circled something near the edge of her property, where the woods began. "What have you found?" she muttered, trudging through the snow. As she approached, Buck looked up at her, then back down at what appeared to be a dark bundle half buried in a snowdrift. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized it was a person. Kneeling down, she brushed away the snow to reveal the face of a boy, no more than 12 or 13 years old. His copper skin and long black hair told her immediately that he was Lakota. What was a Lakota child doing so far from their territory, alone in a blizzard? His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. Sarah touched his face. It was far too cold. Without hesitation, she dropped her rifle in the snow and scooped the boy into her arms. He was lighter than she expected, but still a burden as she struggled. Back toward the cabin, Buck leading the way. Once inside, Sarah laid the boy on her bed and quickly stoked the fire, adding more logs until the flames roared. She removed his frozen outer garments, a deerskin jacket adorned with intricate beadwork, now stiff with ice, and wrapped him in her warmest quilt. His moccasins were soaked through, his feet an alarming shade of white tinged with blue. "Frostbite," she whispered. She'd seen it before, during her first winter, when a trapper had stumbled to her door with blackened fingertips. He'd lost 3 fingers, but lived. This boy might not be so lucky if she didn't act fast. Sarah filled a basin with lukewarm water, not hot, she remembered the doctor's warning, and began to gently bathe the boy's feet. He moaned softly, but didn't wake. Next, she prepared a tea of willow bark for the fever she knew would come, mixed with a bit of honey from her precious store. As she worked, questions tumbled through her mind. The nearest Lakota settlement was at least 40 miles north, near the Black Hills. Had he wandered from a hunting party? Was his family searching for him even now? The relations between settlers and the Lakota had been strained since the discovery of gold in the Black Hills 5 years prior. The peace treaty of 1868 had been repeatedly violated by gold-hungry prospectors, leading to skirmishes that often turned deadly. General Custer's defeat at Little Bighorn only 2 years ago had heightened tensions further. Sarah herself had little interaction with the Lakota. She kept to herself, and they generally avoided settler territory. The few encounters she'd had with native traders in Willow Creek had been cautious but respectful. Hours passed as Sarah tended to the boy. His breathing gradually steadied, though his skin remained hot with fever. Occasionally, he would mutter words in Lakota that Sarah couldn't understand, his head turning restlessly on the pillow. By midnight, the worst of the storm had passed. Though snow continued to fall outside the frosted windows, Sarah, exhausted, settled into the rocking chair beside the bed, Buck curled at her feet. Despite her intention to stay awake, she drifted into an uneasy sleep. She woke with a start to find a pair of dark eyes watching her intently. The boy was awake, propped up slightly against the pillows, in the soft glow of morning light filtering. Through the snow-crusted windows, Sarah could see his features clearly for the first time. His face was gaunt but handsome, with high cheekbones and a straight nose. A fresh scar ran along his left jawline. "Hello?" Sarah said softly, leaning forward. "Can you understand me?" The boy didn't respond, but his gaze flickered to the water pitcher on the bedside table. Sarah poured a cup and helped him drink, supporting his head. He swallowed eagerly, before sinking back into the pillows. "My name is Sarah," she said, touching her chest. "Sarah Miller." After a moment's hesitation, the boy touched his own chest. "Chetan." His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Chetan," Sarah repeated. "You're safe here, Chetan. The storm has passed." The boy's eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Then he tried to sit up, wincing as he moved his feet. "Easy," Sarah cautioned, gently pressing his shoulders back down. "Your feet were nearly frozen. You need to rest." Chetan's expression clouded, and he spoke rapidly in Lakota, gesturing toward the window. Sarah shook her head, indicating she didn't understand. The boy frowned in frustration before switching to broken English. "My people search. I must go." You can't travel yet," Sarah explained, pulling back the quilt to show him his bandaged feet. "And there's 3 feet of snow outside. When you're stronger, I'll help you find your way home." Chetan's eyes widened as he studied his feet, then looked back at Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "Why do you help?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "Because you needed help," she answered simply. "I couldn't leave you to die in the snow." The boy studied her face intently, as if trying to detect any deception. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he gave a slight nod before closing his eyes again. Sarah prepared a simple broth of dried beef and herbs, which Chetan accepted without complaint. His strength returned surprisingly quickly. By midday, he was sitting up in bed, watching as Sarah went about her chores. "How did you come to be alone in the blizzard?" Sarah finally asked as she set a plate of cornbread beside him. Chetan was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low and measured, as if carefully choosing his limited English words. "Hunting party. 4 days ago. I track deer, become separate. Storm come fast. I lose way." He touched the scar on his jaw. "Fall on rocks. Sleep. Then walk. Walk until no more strength." Sarah nodded. It was a miracle he'd survived at all, let alone made it to the vicinity of her cabin. "Your family must be worried." At the mention of family, a shadow passed over Chetan's face. "My father is war chief. Akacheta, he led search." Something cold settled in Sarah's stomach. A war chief's son. The implications were not lost on her. If the boy had been missing for 4 days, the search would be extensive, and if they believed settlers responsible for his disappearance. "When the weather clears, we'll find a way to let them know you're safe," Sarah assured him, trying to hide her growing unease. That afternoon, as Sarah was checking the boy's bandages, Buck began to bark outside. She'd let him out earlier to relieve himself, and had been too preoccupied to notice he hadn't returned. "Stay here," she told Chetan, reaching for her rifle. The boy's expression had turned alert, his head tilted, as if listening for something Sarah couldn't hear. Outside, the world was a blinding white landscape, pristine except for Buck's tracks leading toward the tree line. Sarah shielded her eyes. Against the glare of sun on snow, and spotted Buck standing rigidly, still barking at something in the woods. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sarah approached cautiously, rifle ready. As she neared the trees, she saw what had caught Buck's attention. A single set of tracks, too large to be an animal's, disappearing into the forest. Human tracks, fresh enough that they hadn't been completely filled by the still falling snow. Someone had been watching her cabin. Sarah's mouth went dry. She called Buck back and retreated to the cabin, securing the door behind her. Chetan was sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to stand. "Someone out there," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Sarah admitted. "Just tracks. Whoever it was has gone." Chetan's expression grew grave. "Scout. From my father's search party." He struggled to stand, grimacing with pain. "Must show myself. They think you take me prisoner." Sarah helped him back onto the bed. "You can't walk. Yet Chetan, your feet need at least another day." "No time," the boy insisted. "Scout will return to my father. Tell what he see. By dawn, warriors will come." The gravity of the situation hit Sarah like a physical blow. If a Lakota war party, believed she was holding the chief's son captive, they would show no mercy. All the stories she'd heard in town, the newspaper accounts of settler families found dead, their cabins burned to the ground, these rushed through her mind in a terrifying cascade. "Then we'll make a signal," she decided. "Something to show them you're here willingly, that you're being cared for." Chetan considered this, then nodded slowly. He pointed to his deerskin jacket, now dry and hanging near the fire. "My jacket has marks of my family. Put it outside where it can be seen." Sarah retrieved the jacket, noting the distinctive pattern of blue and white beads arranged in what appeared to be a family crest on the back panel. "Will they recognize this?" "Yes. Scout already know. Father will know." Sarah nodded and took the jacket outside, finding a spot near the cabin where she secured it to a post with a length of twine, letting it flutter like a flag in the light breeze. It was a risk. Someone else might see it too, but it was their best chance at preventing a misunderstanding that could turn deadly. When she returned, Chetan had managed to stand and was leaning heavily against the wall, testing his weight on his injured feet. "Please," Sarah urged, "you'll only make it worse." but the boy's determination was evident. "Must be ready. When my people come, I stand to greet them. Show I am not a prisoner." Sarah recognized the pride in his stance, the unwillingness to appear weak. It reminded her of her father, a man who had ridden patrol with a bullet in his shoulder, rather than admit to his commanding officer that he was wounded. "At least use this," she said, offering him a sturdy walking stick her father had carved years ago. As the day progressed into evening, Sarah found herself constantly checking the tree line, expecting to see warriors emerging from the shadows. But the forest remained still, disturbed only by occasional gusts of wind that sent snow cascading from laden branches. Chetan grew more restless as night fell. He insisted on sitting by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the darkness gather around the cabin. Sarah busied herself preparing food for what might be a difficult day ahead, while trying to quell her own rising anxiety. "They will not harm you," Chetan said suddenly, breaking the long silence. "I will tell them you saved my life." Sarah looked at him, touched by his concern. "I hope they'll listen. My father is stern but fair. He will honor a life debt." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't entirely reassured. She'd heard too many stories, seen too many newspaper headlines. But what choice did she have? She couldn't flee with 3 feet of snow on the ground, and she wouldn't send Chetan out alone in his condition. That night, Sarah slept fitfully on her rocking chair, while Chetan dozed by the window. Every sound, the settling of logs in the fire, the creak of the cabin's timbers contracting in the cold, startled her awake. Buck remained unusually alert, pacing between the door and the window, his ears constantly perked. In the darkest hour before dawn, Sarah jerked awake from a troubled dream to find Chetan standing at the window, his blanket discarded. His posture was rigid, attentive. "They come," he said simply. Sarah rushed to his side and peered out into the pre-dawn gloom. At first, she saw nothing but the endless white landscape gradually taking shape in the faint light. Then, at the edge of the trees, movement caught her eye. One by one, dark figures emerged from the forest, spreading out in a wide semicircle around the cabin. She counted 7, then 12, then 20 warriors on horseback, their breath and that of their mounts creating clouds of vapor in the frigid air. At their center rode an imposing figure, taller than the rest, adorned with a magnificent headdress of eagle feathers that cascaded down his back. Even at this distance, the authority he commanded was palpable. "My father," Chetan whispered, a note of reverence in his voice. "Chief Akecheta." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as the warriors advanced slowly toward the cabin, until they formed a complete circle around it, cutting off any possibility of escape. Their faces were stern, painted with red and black stripes that made them appear even more formidable in the growing light. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her mouth dry with fear. Chetan straightened to his full height, leaning on the walking stick. "We go outside. I must greet my father with honor, show him I stand by choice." Sarah swallowed hard and nodded. She helped Chetan don his clothes, now clean and dry, though he insisted on leaving his jacket outside as a sign. Then, taking a deep breath, she unbolted the door. The dawn air was sharp with cold as they stepped onto the porch. Buck followed, pressing against Sarah's leg, but remaining mercifully silent. The warriors watched impassively, their horses stamping and snorting in the snow. No one spoke. No one moved. Then Chief Akecheta urged his horse forward, stopping just yards from the cabin. His face was weathered with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of hardship and wisdom. The same high cheekbones as his son, the same proud bearing. He studied Sarah for a long moment before his gaze shifted to Chetan. Father and son regarded each other across the snow, an unspoken communication passing between them. Then Chetan spoke in Lakota, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning. "Air," He gestured to Sarah several times during his speech, and though she couldn't understand the words, she recognized when he was recounting his rescue. When he finished, there was a long silence. The warriors remained motionless, their expressions giving nothing away. Sarah felt the weight of 24 pairs of eyes upon her, judging, assessing. Finally, Chief Akacheta dismounted. His movements were fluid, belying his age, which Sarah guessed to be around 50. He approached slowly, his gaze never leaving Sarah's face. She fought the urge to step back, to retreat into the relative safety of her cabin. Instead, she straightened her spine and met his gaze directly. The chief stopped a few paces away. Up close, Sarah could see the intricate beadwork on his clothing, similar to the pattern on Chetan's jacket, but more elaborate. His face was marked with the same scar as his son's, though his was older, a pale line against his copper skin. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Sarah Miller, a solitary settler woman, facing the war chief of a Lakota tribe at dawn, surrounded by warriors. One word from this man could seal her fate. Chief Akacheta raised his hand, palm out, in what Sarah recognized as a gesture of peace. The silence stretched between them like a living thing. Sarah's breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as she stood before Chief Akacheta, acutely aware of the warriors watching their every move. When the chief finally spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, with only a trace of accent. "My son says you saved his life." Sarah nodded, finding her voice. "I found him in the snow during the blizzard. He was nearly frozen." Chief Akacheta's eyes traveled to his son, who stood proudly despite his obvious pain, then back to Sarah. "Many white settlers would have left a Lakota child to die." "I'm not many people," Sarah replied simply, a flicker of something. Respect, perhaps, crossed the chief's weathered face. He studied her cabin, her clothing, the way she positioned herself protectively near Chetan. "You live here alone?" "Yes. No husband, no family?" Sarah shook her head. "Just me and my dog." This seemed to surprise the chief. He exchanged glances with an older warrior to his right, words passing between them in Lakota, too quick for Sarah to catch the tone. Chetan spoke then, addressing his father with evident respect but also conviction. The chief listened, his expression unreadable. When the boy finished, Akacheta turned back to Sarah. "My son cannot travel yet. His feet need healing." It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded confirmation. "He says you have skill with medicines." "Some," Sarah admitted. "My father was a military man. He taught me what he knew about treating injuries." The chief considered this. 3 days, he finally declared. "We will return in 3 days when the moon is full. If my son can travel then, we will take him home." Relief washed over Sarah, though she tried not to show it. "He's welcome to stay as long as needed." Akacheta raised his hand, and 2 warriors dismounted, approaching the cabin with bundles wrapped in animal hide. "Food," the chief explained, "and medicine for my son's feet, made by our healer." Sarah accepted the offerings with a respectful nod. "Thank you." "We will camp nearby," Akacheta continued. 2 of my warriors will remain to watch over my son." He gestured to the men who had delivered the bundles. "They will not disturb you." Before Sarah could respond, the chief turned to address his son once more. Their exchange was brief but clearly emotional, with Chetan straightening even taller despite his pain. Then, with a final nod to Sarah, Akacheta returned to his horse, and mounted in one fluid motion. The warriors began to disperse, some following the chief back toward the forest, others riding off in different directions to establish their camp. As promised, 2 remained, settling themselves at a respectful distance from the cabin, where they began unloading supplies from their horses. Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Your father is formidable." The hint of a smile crossed Chetan's face. "Yes, but he is fair. He thanks you for my life. Sarah helped Chetan back inside, noticing how the interaction had tired him. His feet, though improving, still needed careful attention. She settled him on the bed and unwrapped the bundle of Lakota medicine, finding dried herbs, poultices, and a small clay pot of strong-smelling salve. "Your healer sent these," she said, showing him the remedies. Chetan nodded, recognizing them. "Wakani, our medicine woman. She knows many things about healing." Over the next hours, Sarah followed Chetan's instructions for applying the traditional medicines to his injuries. The salve had a pungent, earthy smell, but seemed to provide immediate relief, with Chetan sighing as the pain visibly eased from his expression. By midday, the boy had fallen into a peaceful sleep. Sarah stepped outside to check on her livestock and found one of the Lakota warriors, a man perhaps a few years younger than herself, already at the barn. "Your animals were hungry," he explained in surprisingly good English, closing the barn door behind him. "I gave them hay." "Thank you," Sarah said, taken aback by the unexpected help. "You speak English well." The warrior's expression remained stoic, but Sarah detected a hint of pride in his voice. "I was taken to a mission school as a child, before I escaped and returned to my people." Sarah hesitated, unsure whether to press further. "My name is Sarah Miller." "I am called Hanska," he replied after a moment. "It means tall in your tongue." The name suited him. Hanska stood at least a head taller than most of the other warriors, with broad shoulders and a lean frame. His black hair was braided with strips of red cloth, and a single eagle feather was affixed at the back. Unlike the others, his face bore no paint, revealing strong features and clear, watchful eyes. "How is the chief's son?" he asked, glancing toward the cabin. "Resting comfortably. The medicine your healer sent is helping." Hanska nodded, seemingly satisfied. "The storm brought him to you. Some would say Wakan Tanka, the Great Spirit, guided his steps." With that cryptic statement, Hanska returned to his position near the edge of the clearing, where his companion was constructing a small shelter against the cold. The rest of the day passed quietly. Sarah tended to her chores, prepared food, and checked on Chetan, who slept for hours, his body recovering from its ordeal. The Lakota sentries kept their distance, but remained vigilant, their presence a constant reminder of the unusual circumstances that had brought them all together. As evening approached, Sarah prepared a hearty stew of dried beef, root vegetables, and some of the provisions the Lakota had brought. Strips of venison and unfamiliar herbs that added a rich, complex flavor. When Chetan awoke, she helped him to the table where he ate with obvious appreciation. "You are kind," he said between spoonfuls. "Not like other Wasichu, white people, I have met." Sarah considered this as she broke off a piece of cornbread. "I've had little contact with your people. The stories in town, they paint the Lakota as dangerous." Chetan's expression darkened. "And our stories paint the Wasichu as thieves who break promises and take what isn't theirs." "The Black Hills," Sarah murmured, aware of the bitter conflict that had erupted when gold was discovered in lands sacred to the Lakota. "Pahasapa," Chetan nodded. "The heart of the world, given to us forever by treaty, then taken when gold was found." There was no childish simplicity in his tone now, only the hard edge of a truth learned through suffering. Sarah had no answer. For this, the newspapers told one story, filled with tales of savage attacks and the march of progress. But sitting across from this boy, intelligent, dignified, wounded by broken promises, she saw another perspective entirely. "I'm sorry," she said finally, knowing the words were inadequate. Chetan studied her face, then shrugged with a wisdom beyond his years. "You did not make those promises. You did not break them." The evening deepened around them. Outside, Sarah could see the distant glow of the Lakota campfires through the trees. Occasionally, the sound of drums would carry on the still night air. a rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the land itself. Chetan listened, a wistful expression crossing his face. "They sing healing songs," he explained. "For me. Will you teach me?" Sarah asked impulsively. "Some words in your language?" Surprise flickered in the boy's dark eyes, followed by something that might have been pleasure. For the next hour, Sarah sat at Chetan's feet by the fire as he patiently taught her basic Lakota words and phrases. She learned Pilamaya, thank, you, waste, good, and Kola, friend. Each word was a small bridge between their worlds. As Chetan began to tire, Sarah helped him back to bed. Just before sleep claimed him, he said, "My father believes you have a strong spirit. That is why he trusts you with me." Sarah pondered these words as she banked the fire for the night. Outside, she could still hear the distant drums, a reminder that she was no longer alone in this wilderness. The next morning, it dawned clear and cold. Sarah woke early to find Hanska again tending to her livestock. This time, she joined him in the barn, working alongside him in companionable silence as they fed the animals and refreshed their water. "You do a man's work," Hanska observed as Sarah hefted a hay bale. "Out here there's no such thing as men's work or women's work," Sarah replied. "There's just what needs doing." A ghost of a smile crossed Hanska's usually impassive face. "Among my people, women are strong too. They own the teepees and all within them. They have voices in council." "That's more power than white women have," Sarah remarked, thinking of the restrictions she'd left behind in Philadelphia. Later, as Sarah chopped wood outside her cabin, Hanska's companion approached. He was older, with streaks of grey in his braids and lines of experience etched into his copper face. "I am Maka," he introduced himself, his English more halting than Hanska's. "Red Earth." Without further explanation, he took the axe from Sarah's hands and began splitting logs with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched, bemused by this unexpected help. "Thank you." Maka nodded without pausing in his work. "Chief says we will help. You help his son, we help you." Inside the cabin, Chetan was attempting to stand without assistance. His determination was paying off. He could now place weight on his feet for short periods, though pain still creased his brow when he moved too quickly. By midday, several women from the Lakota camp arrived, led by an elderly woman with a dignified bearing and sharp, intelligent eyes. She introduced herself as Wakani, the medicine woman who had prepared the remedies for Chetan. "I come to see the boy," she announced, "and to meet the Wasichu woman with healing hands." Sarah welcomed them into her cabin, oddly nervous under Wakani's penetrating gaze. The old woman examined Chetan's feet with gentle but thorough attention, murmuring in Lakota as she worked. Finally, she nodded in satisfaction. "You have used our medicines well," she told Sarah. "The spirits favor this boy. He will walk without a pain when the moon is full." The women had brought freshly prepared food, a stew of rabbit and wild roots, flat bread cooked on stones, and dried berries sweetened with honey. They laid out the meal for Sarah and Chetan, then retreated to a respectful distance, watching with interest as Sarah ate. "They are curious about you," Chetan explained between bites. "A woman alone in this place. It is unusual even to us." "What do they think of me?" Sarah asked, self-conscious under their scrutiny. Chetan translated her question, resulting in animated discussion among the women. Their responses made him smile. "They think you are brave," he translated, "and that your hair is the color of autumn grass." He hesitated, then added with a mischievous glint, "Wakani says you should have a husband. She offers her grandson." Sarah nearly choked on her stew, causing ripples of laughter among the Lakota women. Wakani's eyes twinkled as she spoke directly to Sarah, gesturing emphatically. "She says her grandson is a great hunter," Shaitan translated, clearly enjoying Sarah's discomfort, and that mixed children are strong like river stones. Please thank her for the kind offer, Sarah managed, her cheeks burning, but tell her I'm content as I am. After the women departed, Sarah discovered they had left a beautifully crafted deerskin dress, adorned with intricate beadwork, similar to the pattern on Shaitan's jacket. When she held it up questioningly, Shaitan explained, "A gift from my mother. She is grateful." Sarah ran her fingers over the detailed handiwork, overwhelmed by the generosity. "It's beautiful. It tells our story." Shaitan pointed to different elements of the beadwork. "These are mountains, these are rivers, these marks show my father's lineage back to the time when our people first received the sacred pipe." The afternoon brought more visitors from the Lakota camp, children curious about the white woman who had saved their chief's son, young warriors paying respects, elders bringing gifts and assessing Sarah with wise, weathered eyes. With each interaction, the initial tension eased, replaced by a cautious but genuine exchange. Sarah found herself drawn into conversation with the women, learning about their daily lives, their traditions, the challenges they faced as their territory shrank and game became scarcer. Despite the language barrier, with Shaitan and Hanska translating, she began to understand the depth and complexity of Lakota culture in ways the newspapers and dime novels could never convey. As dusk fell, Chief Akecheta himself arrived at the cabin. He came alone this time, without the formal bearing of the previous day. Sarah invited him inside, where Shaitan greeted his father with evident joy, showing off his improved mobility by taking several steps unassisted. The chief's stern countenance softened as he watched his son. He spoke at length with Shaitan in their language, occasionally glancing at Sarah during their conversation. Finally, he turned to address her directly. "My son tells me you wish to learn our ways." Sarah nodded, uncertain where this was leading. "I've lived near Lakota land for 3 years, yet I know so little about your people." Akecheta considered this. "Tomorrow you will come to our camp. My wife wishes to meet the woman who saved our son." The invitation surprised Sarah. "I would be honored." After the chief departed, Shaitan explained the significance of the invitation. "It is rare for Wasichu to enter our camp by choice. My father shows great respect by asking you to come." That night, Sarah lay awake long after Shaitan had fallen asleep, contemplating the unexpected turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she had been alone. Her only contact with others, the monthly trips to Willow Creek for supplies. Now her cabin had become a crossroads between two worlds, and tomorrow she would step fully into a culture she had only glimpsed from afar. Morning brought clear skies and a warmth unusual for early March. Sarah donned the deerskin dress she'd been gifted, braided her light brown hair, and looked at her reflection in the small mirror above her wash basin. The woman who gazed back seemed different somehow, less isolated, more connected to the land and people around her. Hanska arrived to escort them to the camp. He nodded approvingly at Sarah's attire, but said nothing as he helped Shaitan mount his horse. To Sarah's surprise, a second horse was provided for her. "I've never ridden astride," she admitted, eyeing the animal nervously. "Philadelphia ladies ride side saddle when they rode at all. Then today you learn," Hanska replied, offering his hand to help her up. The Lakota camp lay about 2 miles from Sarah's cabin, nestled in a protected valley where a small stream provided water. As they approached, Sarah was struck by the orderly arrangement of the teepees, each painted with symbols and arranged according to family groupings. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children darted between dwellings, and women worked at tanning hides or preparing food. Activity paused as they entered the camp, all eyes turning to the white woman in Lakota dress. Sarah felt a momentary panic at being the center of such intense scrutiny, but Shaitan's proud posture beside her gave her courage. They dismounted before the largest teepee, decorated with an impressive painted scene of a buffalo hunt. Chief Akacheta emerged, followed by a woman of striking beauty, despite the silver threading through her long black hair. Her bearing matched the chief's dignity, her gaze direct and assessing as it fell upon Sarah. "My wife Mahi," Akacheta introduced her. "Mother of Chetan." Mahi stepped forward and took Sarah's hands in her own, studying her face intently before speaking in Lakota. Chetan translated, "My mother says your eyes show a good heart. She welcomes you to our camp." What followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. She was led through the camp, introduced to families, shown crafts and skills passed down through generations. Children who had initially hidden behind their mother's skirts grew bold enough to touch her hair, fascinated by its lighter color. Elders shared stories through interpreters, speaking of times before the Wasichu came, when the buffalo were plentiful and the Lakota followed them freely across the plains. In Mahi's teepee, Sarah watched as women worked on elaborate beadwork, their fingers moving with practiced precision. When they encouraged her to try, her clumsy attempts brought gentle laughter and patient correction. "They say your fingers will learn," Hanska translated, having appointed himself her guide for the day, "as your heart is learning." The afternoon brought a feast in honor of Chetan's return and Sarah's role in saving him. Food was plentiful. Roasted venison, stews thick with wild onions and roots, berries preserved from the previous autumn. Sarah sat in a place of honor beside Mahi, acutely aware of the privilege she was being granted. As they ate, a resonant voice rose in song, soon joined by others. The melodies were unlike anything Sarah had heard before, haunting, complex, filled with a spiritual quality that seemed to connect with something deep inside her. Even without understanding the words, she felt their power. "They sing of the land," Hanska explained quietly, "of our connection to all living things, of the circle that binds us all." When the meal concluded, Chief Akacheta addressed his people, speaking at length in Lakota. Sarah noticed how the atmosphere shifted as he spoke, becoming more solemn. Finally, he turned to her. "Tomorrow we will return with you to your cabin. When the moon is full, we will take our son home." He paused, studying her reaction. "But today we wish to thank you properly for the life you have saved." Wakani approached, carrying a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. With ceremonial dignity, she presented it to Sarah, speaking words that Hanska translated. "This contains sacred medicines known only to our people. Wakani says the spirits have shown her that you have healing in your hands. She wishes you to have these to help others who may come to your door in need." Deeply moved, Sarah accepted the bundle with both hands, bowing her head in respect. "Tell her I am honored by her trust. I will use these gifts with reverence." Next came Mahi, bearing a necklace of polished stones, fossil shells, and delicate quill work. As she placed it around Sarah's neck, she spoke directly, as if willing Sarah to understand without translation. She says, Chetan interpreted, his voice thick with emotion, that you are now sister to her heart, that our family is now your family, that no matter what comes between our peoples, you will never be forgotten by the Lakota. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes as the significance of the moment washed over her. In this remote wilderness, far from the society that had defined her early years, she had found connection in the most unexpected place. As the sun began its westward descent, painting the prairie in gold and amber, Sarah sat among the Lakota, no longer an outsider but not quite one of them, existing in that rare space between worlds where new understanding can take root and grow. Behind her, Hanska stood sentinel, his expression thoughtful as he observed the white woman who had, against all odds, earned a place of honor among his people. And beside him, Chief Akacheta watched his son, now laughing with the other children. His ordeal behind him, but its lessons permanently etched into the story of their tribe. In the gathering dusk, as stars began to pepper the vast Dakota sky, the drums began again, a heartbeat that seemed to echo across the prairie, connecting past to present, earth to sky, stranger to friend. Dawn painted the eastern sky in delicate strokes of pink and gold as Sarah, Chetan, and their Lakota escorts made their way back to the cabin. After the festivities of the previous day, a comfortable silence had settled among them, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of hooves on snow and the occasional call of a waking bird. Sarah rode beside Mahi, the chief's wife, who had insisted on accompanying them. Though they shared no common language, a bond had formed between them, the universal connection of women who understood survival in a harsh land. As they crested the final hill overlooking Sarah's homestead, Mahi reined her horse to a stop, surveying the modest cabin, the small barn, the cleared land that represented years of Sarah's solitary labor. "Washte," she said, nodding appreciatively. "Good." Hanska, riding just behind them, translated Mahi's next words. "She says you have built a strong place, that the land has accepted you." Coming from Mahi, this was high praise indeed. Sarah had learned enough about Lakota beliefs to understand that their connection to the land was spiritual, sacred, not the utilitarian relationship most settlers maintained. "The land has taught me much," Sarah replied, hoping Hanska would convey the sincerity behind her words. As they approached the cabin, Sarah noticed something unusual, smoke rising from her chimney. She tensed, exchanging a concerned glance with Hanska, who had also spotted it. "Stay here," he commanded, spurring his horse forward with Maka close behind. But before they could reach the cabin, the door swung open. A tall figure emerged. A white man in a fringed buckskin jacket, rifle held casually but ready. Behind him, Sarah could make out two more men inside her home. "Thomas!" she breathed, recognizing the trader from Willow Creek. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The Lakota warriors who had accompanied them from camp moved their horses into protective formation around Chetan and the women. Chief Akacheta, who had been riding at the rear, nudged his mount forward, his expression darkening as he assessed the intruders. Thomas Miller, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, had been one of the first to welcome her when she arrived in Dakota territory. His trading post served as the hub of Willow Creek, a source of supplies, mail, and news from the outside world. In the 3 years Sarah had known him, he'd been unfailingly courteous, if somewhat persistent in his attentions toward her. Now, as he recognized Sarah among the Lakota party, relief washed over his weathered face. "Sarah, thank God!" He lowered his rifle, waving broadly. "Boys, it's her! She's alive!" The other men appeared in the doorway. Jonas Blackwood, who ran the livery stable in town, and young Matthew Harper, the son of the general store owner. All three looked trail-worn and anxious. Thomas started forward, then faltered as he registered the full scene before him. Sarah in Lakota dress, riding alongside the chief's wife, surrounded by warriors. His relief curdled visibly into confusion, then suspicion. "Sarah?" His hand drifted back toward his rifle. Are these Injuns holding you captive?" "No, Thomas." Sarah urged her horse forward, breaking away from the protective circle, despite Hanska's warning gesture. "These are my guests. What are you doing in my home?" Thomas and his companions exchanged baffled glances. "Your guests? When you didn't come to town for supplies last week, folks got worried. Then Billy Jenkins came through saying he'd seen Lakota warriors near your place. We feared the worst." Sarah dismounted, handing her reins to Hanska, who had moved protectively to her side. "As you can see, I'm perfectly fine. More than fine, in fact." She explained briefly about finding Chetan in the blizzard, caring for him, and the subsequent visit from his tribe. With each word, Thomas's expression grew more incredulous. "You mean to tell me you've been harboring a Lakota boy? After what they did to the Hansen family last summer?" "The Hansens were killed by renegades," Hanska interjected in perfect English, causing Thomas to start in surprise. "Not by our tribe." "All due respect, mister," Thomas retorted, his tone suggesting anything but respect. "But you savages all look the same to me." Sarah stepped between them, anger flaring. "That's enough, Thomas. These people have shown me nothing but gratitude and kindness. Chief Akacheta has honored me as a friend of his tribe." At the mention of the chief, Thomas paled slightly, his gaze shifting to the imposing figure still mounted on his horse. Even those unfamiliar with Lakota politics knew of Chief Akacheta. His reputation as a fierce warrior but fair leader had spread throughout the territory. "Sarah," Thomas lowered his voice, leaning closer, "you don't understand what you're mixed up in. These people are dangerous. Just last month, they attacked a supply train headed for the mining camps." "That was not our doing," Chief Akacheta spoke for the first time, his deep voice carrying clearly across the yard. "The Wasichu who say this lie to cover their own crimes against our people." An uncomfortable silence fell. Sarah could feel the tension radiating from both sides, the wariness of the Lakota warriors, the nervous hostility of the men from town. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture could ignite the situation. Chetan, who had remained quiet throughout the exchange, suddenly urged his horse forward to stand beside Sarah. Despite his youth, he carried himself with the dignity of a father. "This woman saved my life," he declared, looking Thomas directly in the eye. "She tends my wounds when others would leave me to die. My people honor her for this." Thomas seemed taken aback by the boy's perfect English and confident demeanor. He glanced between Chetan and Sarah, clearly struggling to reconcile his preconceptions with the scene before him. Finally, he sighed, shoulders slumping slightly. "Well, I can see you're safe at least. But Sarah, people in town won't understand this." He gestured vaguely at the gathered Lakota. "There's talk of calling in the cavalry from Fort Randall if the Indian problem gets any worse." A ripple of tension passed through the Lakota at the mention of soldiers. Sarah had read enough newspapers to know that relations between the U.S. Army and the remaining free tribes had deteriorated to their lowest point in years. "There is no Indian problem here," she said firmly. "Only people trying to live according to their ways. Now I appreciate your concern, but I'd like you and your friends to leave. You've entered my home without permission, and I have guests to attend to." Thomas looked as if he might argue further, but something in Sarah's expression stopped him. "As you wish, but I hope you know what you're doing," he signaled to his companions, who reluctantly began collecting their things from inside the cabin. As they mounted their horses, Thomas turned back to Sarah. "Monthly supply train comes through. In 2 days, will we see you in town?" Sarah nodded. "I'll be there." With a final dubious glance at the gathered Lakota, Thomas led his men back toward the trail to Willow Creek. Sarah watched them go, a knot of unease settling in her stomach. Their presence had shattered the fragile peace of the past days, reminding her of the wider world that existed beyond her small clearing, a world where the Lakota were seen not as the complex, dignified people she had come to know, but as an obstacle to be removed. "They fear what they do not understand," Mahi said quietly in halting English, surprising Sarah, who hadn't realized the chief's wife spoke her language at all. The remainder of the day passed in preparation for the following morning when, as agreed, most of the Lakota would depart for their winter camp further north. Chetan's feet had healed remarkably well under the combined care of Sarah and Wakani's medicines. Though he still favored his left foot slightly, he could walk without assistance and insisted he was ready to travel. As Sarah helped him pack the gifts she had prepared, jars of preserved fruit, a small carved wooden horse she'd found among her father's belongings, and a notebook in which she'd written down the English words they had practiced, She found herself unaccountably sad at the prospect of his departure. "You have taught me much, Sarah Miller," Chetan said, seeming to sense her melancholy, "about the goodness that can exist between different peoples." "And you've taught me about courage," she replied, remembering how stoically he had endured his pain, "and about seeing with new eyes." Chief Akacheta joined them as they finished packing. His stern countenance had softened somewhat towards Sarah over the past days, though he maintained the dignified reserve befitting his position. "When the grass grows again," he said formally, "our people will move our camp to the summer hunting grounds north of the river. We would welcome you to visit then, if you wish." The invitation, an extraordinary gesture from a Lakota chief to a white settler, left Sarah momentarily speechless. "I would be honored," she finally managed. As evening approached, Hanska appeared at Sarah's door, bearing a small object wrapped in soft leather. "A gift," he explained, offering it to her. "From me." Sarah unwrapped it to find an exquisitely carved flute made of cedar wood, decorated with symbols burned into its surface. "It tells a story," Hanska explained, pointing to the intricate designs, "of a woman alone who becomes part of a circle." His normally impassive face showed a hint of vulnerability as he added, "I will teach you to play it when you visit our summer camp." The simple statement contained layers of meaning that Sarah wasn't entirely sure how to interpret. During their days together, she'd grown increasingly aware of Hanska's quiet attentiveness, the way his eyes followed her movements, how he positioned himself protectively near her when others were present. "Thank you," she said softly, running, her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's beautiful." Hanska nodded once, then turned to leave before pausing at the doorway. "The men from your town. They will cause trouble." Sarah sighed, setting the flute carefully on her table. "Thomas means well, but he sees the world in simple terms, white and Indian, civilized and savage. He doesn't understand." She trailed, off unsure how to explain the complex web of politics, prejudice, and fear that defined relations between settlers and native peoples in the territory. "No one who truly knows your heart could think you savage," she finished quietly. Something flickered in Hanska's dark eyes, gratitude perhaps, or a deeper emotion she wasn't prepared to name. Before he could respond, Mahka appeared, speaking rapidly in Lakota. Hanska's expression closed immediately, reverting to its usual stoic mask. "Scouts have reported riders, many riders, coming from the direction of your town. They will reach here by morning." Alarm shot through Sarah. "Soldiers? No. Men like those who came earlier. But more." Sarah's mind raced. Why would a large party from Willow Creek be heading toward her cabin? Then she remembered Thomas's words about the Indian, a problem, and his obvious distress at finding her in the company of the Lakota. "He's bringing the townspeople," she realized aloud. "They think I'm in danger." Hanska conveyed this information to Chief Akacheta, who arrived moments later with Chetan and several warriors. A rapid discussion ensued in Lakota, with occasional glances towards Sarah. "My father says we must leave now," Chetan translated. "Before the Wasichu arrive, there will be bloodshed otherwise." "No," Sarah protested. "Let me speak with them. I can explain." "They will not listen," Akacheta interrupted, his voice heavy with the weight of experience. "When Wasichu men come, with guns and fear in their hearts, words mean nothing." Sarah knew he was right. The prejudice ran too deep, the fear too ingrained. Even if she could convince Thomas of the truth, others in the party might be spoiling for a fight, eager to prove themselves against the savage Lakota. "Then go," she agreed reluctantly, "but know that my home is always open to you." Within the hour, the Lakota had broken camp. Sarah stood at her door, watching as they prepared to depart under the cover of darkness, traveling north through little-used trails that would allow them to avoid the approaching settlers. Chetan embraced her fiercely. I will not forget. He whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Mahi pressed her forehead briefly against Sarah's in a gesture of deep respect, murmuring words that needed no translation. Wakani placed her weathered hands on Sarah's cheeks, looking deeply into her eyes, before nodding once, as if confirming something only she could see. Last came Chief Akacheta, who removed a single eagle feather from his headdress and presented it to Sarah with ceremonial gravity. "This marks you as a friend of the Lakota," he announced. "Any of our people who see it will know you stand under my protection." As the Lakota prepared to depart, Hanska lingered behind. In the silver moonlight, his features seemed carved from shadow and light, his expression unreadable. "I will return," he said simply. "When the moon is new again." Before Sarah could respond, he had mounted his horse and joined the departing tribe, a dark procession melting into the night. Alone once more in her cabin, Sarah found the silence, deafening after days filled with conversation, laughter, and the rhythmic cadence of the Lakota language. Buck sensed her melancholy, pressing his muzzle against her hand in silent comfort. She slept fitfully that night, waking often to listen for approaching riders. When dawn finally broke, she dressed carefully in her usual clothes, practical cotton, skirt, woolen shirtwaist, sturdy boots, but kept the necklace Mahi had given her hidden beneath her collar. The eagle feather she tucked safely in a small leather pouch that had belonged to her mother, hanging it around her neck alongside the necklace. The sound of hoofbeats reached her ears just as she finished securing her hair in its usual practical bun. Stepping onto her porch, she counted at least 15 riders approaching, nearly every able-bodied man from Willow Creek, led by Thomas, and, to her dismay, Sheriff Hayes, whose main qualification for office seemed to be his loud voice and louder opinions about the Indian question. "Sarah!" Thomas called as they thundered into her yard. "Thank God you're all right. We came as soon as we could gather enough men." Sheriff Hayes dismounted, hitching his gun belt higher on his substantial waist. "Miller tells us you had a whole war party of Lakota here, ma'am. Says they had you dressed up like some squaw and acting like you'd joined their heathen ways." Several men murmured agreement, their hands hovering near their weapons as they scanned the area for signs of the Lakota. "I was never in any danger," Sarah stated firmly. "I found a Lakota boy injured in the blizzard and nursed him back to health. His tribe came to bring him home. They showed me nothing but gratitude and respect." Her words were met with skeptical glances. Sheriff Hayes hawked and spat, narrowly missing Sarah's flower bed. "Gratitude ain't exactly what Injuns are known for in these parts, ma'am. More like scalping and stealing." "These were Akacheta's people," Sarah countered, noting how several men straightened at the chief's name. "They were peaceful. They even helped me with my chores and brought food as thanks." Thomas dismounted, approaching Sarah with concern etched on his features. "Sarah, you don't understand. They were using you. Probably trying to gather intelligence on the town, or worse." "And where are they now?" Sheriff Hayes demanded, hand resting on his pistol. "Gone. They left last night." "Convenient," one of the men muttered, "probably planning to circle back and raid once we're gone." Sarah's patience, already stretched thin, finally snapped. "This is my home, gentlemen. I've lived here peacefully for 3 years without incident. I neither requested nor require your rescue. Now, I'll thank you for leaving my property." Sheriff Hayes removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Now, Miss Miller, we understand you've had a frightening experience. These savages have ways of confusing a person, especially a delicate female such as yourself." The patronizing tone made Sarah's blood boil, but she held her tongue, recognizing that direct confrontation would only entrench their position. "Sheriff," she said with forced calmness, "I assure you my faculties are perfectly intact. The Lakota saved my life this winter by sharing their food when game was scarce. I returned the favor by helping one of their children. There's nothing more to the story," Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Sarah, people are talking. They're saying you've gone native, that you can't be trusted anymore." His expression held genuine concern. "I'm trying to help you here." Sarah realized with sudden clarity that her actions had placed her in a precarious position within the small community. In the rigid social hierarchy of the frontier, associating with Indians was sometimes viewed as a betrayal of one's own kind, especially for a woman alone. "I appreciate your concern," she said carefully, "but I have done nothing wrong, nothing to be ashamed of." Sheriff Hayes cleared his throat importantly. "Be that as it may, ma'am, we need to know where these Injuns were headed. Army patrol from Fort Randall's been asking about Lakota movements in the area. Says they've had reports of raids on supply wagons." "I don't know where they went," Sarah replied truthfully, "and I wouldn't tell you if I did. They aren't the ones responsible for those raids." A tense silence followed her declaration. Several men exchanged meaningful glances, and Thomas looked pained, as if she'd confirmed his worst fears. "Well," Sheriff Hayes finally said, his tone significantly cooler, "I reckon we've done our Christian duty in checking on your welfare, Miss Miller, but I'm obliged to inform you that harboring hostiles is a serious offense. The Army might take an interest if it happens again." The threat was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. Sarah lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm well aware of the law, Sheriff. I've broken none of it." As the men prepared to depart, Thomas lingered behind. "Sarah," he began awkwardly, "there's a social at the church this Sunday. Might do you good to come. Show folks you're still—" He trailed off, unable to find a tactful way to finish the thought. "Still one of you?" Sarah supplied. "Still civilized?" Thomas flushed. "That's not what I meant." But they both knew it was precisely what he meant. Sarah softened slightly, recognizing that in his limited way, Thomas was trying to help. "I'll consider it," she conceded. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have chores waiting." As the men rode away, Sarah returned to her cabin, shoulders sagging as reaction set in. The confrontation had left her drained, but more troublingly, it had illuminated the precarious position she now occupied, caught between two worlds, fully belonging to neither. Buck whined softly, pressing against her leg in canine sympathy. Sarah scratched his ears absently, her mind already turning to the challenges ahead. She had crossed a boundary, one that many in Willow Creek would never understand or forgive. Yet she wouldn't regret the connections she'd formed with Chetan, Mahi, Wakani, and yes, with Hanska. She fingered the eagle feather in its pouch, drawing strength from what it represented. Whatever came next, she would face it, with the same courage that had brought her to this wild, beautiful land in the first place. Outside her window, a lone hawk circled against the endless Dakota sky, free and unbound by the arbitrary lines humans drew across the earth. Sarah watched its flight, a small smile playing at her lips as she remembered Chetan's words about the great spirit that lived in all things, connecting all people regardless of the colors of their skin or the languages on their tongues. In that moment, despite the uncertainties that lay ahead, Sarah Miller felt more at home in this vast wilderness than she ever had before. The following weeks unfolded with a strange new rhythm to Sarah's life. Spring arrived with unexpected swiftness, melting the snow and transforming the prairie into a canvas of vibrant wildflowers. But the beauty of the season was tempered by a chill of a different sort, the cold reception she now faced in Willow Creek. She had attended the church social as Thomas suggested, determined to maintain her connections to the community she relied upon for supplies and occasional companionship. The moment she entered the modest clapboard building, conversations had stuttered to silence, followed by the unmistakable buzz of whispers. Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife and self-appointed arbiter of local propriety, had approached with a brittle smile. "Sarah, dear," How brave of you to join us." The word brave hung in the air, its double meaning unmistakable. Several women drew their children closer as Sarah passed, as if her association with the Lakota might be contagious. Only Rebecca Taylor, the young schoolteacher who had arrived from Boston the previous autumn, showed genuine warmth, engaging Sarah in conversation about her garden plans for the spring. But even Rebecca lowered her voice when asking about your recent visitors, her curiosity evident but restrained by the watchful eyes around them. Thomas had made a point of dancing with Sarah, a public gesture of support that she appreciated, despite the awkwardness between them. "Give them time," he had murmured as they circled the floor. "Folks'll forget once something more interesting comes along." But 3 weeks later, as Sarah loaded supplies into her wagon under the scrutinizing gaze of half the town, it was clear that time had done little to soften attitudes. Mr. Harper charged her extra for flour, claiming supply problems. Sheriff Hayes followed her movements with suspicious eyes from his customary seat outside the barber shop. Even the blacksmith, who had always been cordial, was brusque and hurried in his repair of her wagon wheel. Only Thomas maintained his friendly overtures, though Sarah detected an agenda behind his increased attentions. Today, as she prepared to depart, he appeared at her wagon, offering a package wrapped in brown paper. "Coffee beans," he explained. "Just arrived on yesterday's supply train. Thought you might enjoy them." "Thank you, Thomas." Sarah accepted the gift with a genuine smile. Despite her frustration with his inability to understand her perspective on the Lakota, she recognized the decency beneath his prejudices, a product of his upbringing rather than a flaw in his character. He leaned against her wagon, lowering his voice. "Sarah, there's talk of a cavalry detachment coming through. Seems the army's planning a sweep through Lakota territory before summer. Word is they're expecting trouble when the tribes gather for the annual Sundance." A chill ran through Sarah despite the mild spring air. The Sundance was the most sacred ceremony of the Plains tribes, a spiritual gathering that united bands from across the territory. If the army was planning operations during this sacred time, the potential for conflict was enormous. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Thomas ran a hand through his sandy hair, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Because I think you might have connections, ways to get the word to them." His expression was conflicted, torn between his instinctive distrust of the Lakota and his feelings for Sarah. "I'm not saying I approve of your friendship with those people, but I don't want to see a massacre either." Sarah studied him, surprised by this unexpected complexity. "Thank you for telling me. Just be careful," he warned. "Sheriff's been watching your place. Says he's concerned about your safety, living so far out with hostiles in the area. But between you and me, I think he's more interested in catching you helping them." The implications were clear and troubling. Sarah finished loading her supplies with renewed urgency. As she climbed onto the wagon seat, Thomas placed a hand on her arm. "Sunday dinner," he suggested, with forced casualness. "My place. Just the two of us. Might help quiet some of the talk in town if folks think we're, well, you know." The offer was tempting in its practicality. Association with Thomas, a respected business owner, would provide a shield against the worst of the gossip. Yet something in Sarah rebelled against such calculated protection. "I appreciate the thought, Thomas, but I won't pretend to have feelings I don't have just to make others comfortable." His face fell slightly, though he covered it with a quick smile. "Can't blame a man for trying. Offer stands if you change your mind." The journey back to her cabin was filled with uneasy thoughts. The news of army movements threatened the fragile peace that existed between the settlers and the remaining free bands of Lakota. If conflict erupted, Sarah had no illusions about where the sympathies of Willow Creek would lie, nor any doubt about the consequences for someone perceived as an Indian lover. As her cabin came into view, Sarah noticed immediately that something was different. Buck, who had remained behind to guard the property, was not barking his usual greeting. Instead, he sat calmly on the porch beside a figure that rose at her approach. "Hanska," she breathed, her heart performing an unexpected leap. He stepped forward to help her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure as they grasped her waist. In the clear spring light, she noticed new details about him. A scar along his temple that disappeared into his hairline, the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, the intricate beadwork on his leather vest that matched the pattern on her gifted dress. "You have been to your town," he observed, noting her finery, the blue calico dress she reserved for trips to Willow Creek. "The people there, they treat you well?" Something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Sarah sighed as she began unloading supplies. "They're afraid of what they don't understand," Hanska nodded, taking a heavy sack of flour from her arms with effortless strength. "Fear makes people cruel. My people also. Many fear the Wasichu ways, the changes they bring." Working together, they unloaded the wagon and stabled the horses. Only when they settled on the porch with cups of the precious coffee did Sarah ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why have you come back?" Hanska gazed out across the greening prairie, his profile sharp against the afternoon sky. "2 reasons. First, to bring news of Chetan. He is well, his feet heal with no lasting harm. He sends his greetings to the woman who saved him." Sarah smiled at this, genuine warmth spreading through her at the thought of the brave young boy. "And the second reason," Hanska turned to face her directly, his expression solemn. "To warn you, soldiers move north from Fort Randall. 20, maybe 30 men with new rifles. They ask questions in many places about Lakota camps." The confirmation of Thomas's information sent a jolt of alarm through Sarah. "I heard rumors in town. They say the army is planning something before the sun dance." "Yes, our scouts have seen their preparations." Hanska's mouth tightened into a grim line. "The Wasichu government promised us the Black Hills forever. Then gold was found, and forever became yesterday. Now they seek to push us further, to break our strength before we gather for the sacred ceremonies." Sarah set down her coffee cup, distressed by the inevitability in his voice. "There must be something that can be done, some way to avoid bloodshed." "Chief, Akacheta counsels peace. He seeks to negotiate." Hanska's tone suggested his disagreement with this approach. "But many young warriors grow tired of broken promises. They listen to other voices, to War Eagle, who says we must fight or lose everything." War Eagle, a young chief from the northern bands, brave in battle, strong in speech. He gains influence among the warriors. Hanska's expression darkened. "He says Akacheta grows weak, too willing to trust Wasichu words." The political complexities of the situation were becoming clearer to Sarah. Like any people, the Lakota were not monolithic in their views, but divided on how best to face the existential threats to their way of life. "What will happen?" she asked quietly. Hanska shook his head. "I do not know, but I fear for my people. The soldiers have many guns, many bullets." He looked down at his hands, strong and calloused from a lifetime of hunting and riding. "And I fear for you. For me? You stand between worlds now. The Wasichu town no longer trusts you if fighting comes." He left the sentence unfinished, the implications hanging in the air between them. Sarah absorbed this truth, recognizing its weight. Her actions in saving Chetan, in opening herself to understanding the Lakota, had forever altered her place in the frontier society. There could be no return to simple acceptance among the people of Willow Creek, especially if violence erupted between settlers and the Lakota. "I made my choice," she said firmly. "I don't regret it." Something flickered in Hanska's eyes. Admiration, perhaps, or deeper emotion. "You have a strong heart, Sarah Miller, like a Lakota woman." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the prairie in gold and amber. In the distance, a fox darted through the tall grass, its russet coat gleaming. "I must return before darkness," Hanska finally said, rising from his seat. "Our camp is 2 days' ride north, near the fork of the river." "Will you come again?" Sarah asked, surprised by how much she hoped for an affirmative answer. Hanska nodded. "When the moon grows full, if you wish it." "I do." The words came without hesitation, startling in their certainty. He reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew something wrapped in soft leather. "For you, to practice until I return." Sarah unwrapped it to find a collection of wooden reeds for the flute he had given her. "Thank you, though I fear I have little talent for music." A rare smile crossed Hanska's face, transforming his solemn features. "The flute speaks from the heart, not the hands. Your heart is true. The music will come." As he mounted his horse, Hanska paused, his expression growing serious once more. "If soldiers come here, seeking information about our people, be cautious. The bluecoats respect no boundaries when they hunt." With that warning, he rode north, his silhouette gradually merging with the darkening landscape. Sarah watched until he disappeared, an unfamiliar ache in her chest. That night, as a gentle rain began to fall, she practiced the flute by candlelight. The initial sounds were awkward, discordant, but as she continued, something shifted. She recalled Hanska's words about the heart speaking through the instrument and stopped trying to control each note, instead allowing the music to flow naturally. A simple melody emerged, wistful, yearning, filled with questions without answers. Buck lifted his graying muzzle, listening with canine appreciation. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming on the cabin roof in counterpoint to the flute's voice. Sarah played until her fingers grew stiff, the melody becoming a meditation on her transformed life. When she finally set the flute aside, a sense of peace had settled over her, despite the uncertainties that loomed ahead. The following days fell into familiar patterns of spring labor, preparing the garden, mending fences damaged by winter storms, caring for the new calf born to her best milk cow. Yet beneath this routine, Sarah remained vigilant, watching for signs of the soldiers Hanska had warned about. They arrived 5 days later, a patrol of 8 men led by a Lieutenant Anderson, their blue uniforms dusty from the trail, carbines strapped to their saddles. Sarah was weeding her garden when they approached, their horses' hooves thundering across the open ground with military precision. She straightened, wiping soiled hands on her apron as Buck positioned himself protectively. At her side, the lieutenant reined in his mount, touching the brim of his hat in stiff courtesy. "Miss Miller, I'm Lieutenant James Anderson, 7th Cavalry Regiment, Fort Randall." "Lieutenant." Sarah nodded cautiously. "What brings the army to my doorstep?" Anderson dismounted, handing his reins to a corporal before approaching. He was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps 25, with a neatly trimmed mustache and intelligent blue eyes that assessed her with undisguised curiosity. "Information has reached us that you recently had contact with a band of Lakota." "Sioux," he stated without preamble. "I'd like to ask you some questions about that interaction." Sarah's spine stiffened. "You've been speaking with Sheriff Hayes, I presume." "And others in Willow Creek, yes." The lieutenant produced a small notebook from his breast pocket. "I understand you sheltered a Lakota boy during the March blizzard and subsequently had extensive contact with his tribe, including Chief Akacheta himself." The precise nature of his information confirmed Sarah's suspicions. The townspeople had been thorough in their gossip, and the army equally thorough in collecting it. "That's correct," she acknowledged, seeing no benefit in denial. "The boy was injured. I provided medical care. His people came to retrieve him when he was well enough to travel. They were grateful, not hostile." Lieutenant Anderson made a non-committal sound jotting in his notebook. And during this time did the Lakota discuss their movements, future gathering places, plans for the summer. The purpose of his visit became instantly clear. The army was gathering intelligence for their planned operations against the Lakota, and Sarah was viewed as a potential source. "No," she stated firmly. "Our conversations focused on the boy's recovery, not tribal movements." Anderson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Miss Miller, I should inform you that interfering with army operations or withholding information relevant to territorial security is a serious offense." "As is trespassing on private property," Sarah countered, anger flaring. "I've told you what I know, Lieutenant. The Lakota who visited me were peaceful. They posed no threat to anyone." "With respect, ma'am, you're not qualified to make that assessment." Anderson's tone remained professional, but cooled noticeably. "The Sioux have killed dozens of settlers this past year alone. They've attacked supply trains, ambushed survey parties, and driven off livestock. General Sheridan has authorized operations to contain these hostilities before they escalate further." Sarah bit back a retort about whose land was being contained, aware that expressing such views would only deepen the lieutenant's suspicions. "I've answered your questions truthfully," she said instead. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to attend to." Rather than departing, Anderson signaled to his men, who began spreading out around Sarah's property. Two headed toward the barn, while others began a methodical inspection of the perimeter. "What are you doing?" Sarah demanded, alarm rising. "Standard procedure, ma'am. Checking for signs of recent Lakota presence." The lieutenant's expression remained impassive. "Sheriff Hayes mentioned you've had visits from an Indian man, even after the main group departed." Heat rushed to Sarah's face, partly from anger, partly from the realization that she had been under surveillance. "Sheriff Hayes has no right to spy on me. He has every right to maintain security in his jurisdiction." Anderson studied her flushed complexion with renewed interest. "This Indian visitor, would that be Hanska, one of Akacheta's warriors?" The use of Hanska's name sent a jolt through Sarah. The Army's intelligence was disturbingly specific. "I don't believe I mentioned any names to Sheriff Hayes," she said carefully. "You didn't have to. We have sources within the Lakota bands, individuals who understand the benefits of cooperation with the government." A hint of smugness colored the lieutenant's tone. "Hanska is known to us. A skilled scout, respected warrior, and increasingly a voice for resistance among the younger men. His father was killed at Slim Buttes 2 years ago. This last detail was new to Sarah, a piece of Hanska's history he hadn't shared. She filed it away, even as she maintained her outward composure. "I have nothing more to tell you, Lieutenant." Anderson sighed, his expression suggesting disappointed expectations. "Miss Miller, I'm not unsympathetic to your position. Living alone out here, it's natural to seek connections. But these savages aren't like us. Their customs, their values, fundamentally different. Whatever friendship you think you've formed is built on shifting sand." The condescension in his tone made Sarah's temper flare. "Have you ever spoken with a Lakota, Lieutenant? Learned their language? Understood their beliefs? Or do you simply repeat what you've been told about savages without questioning?" A flash of anger crossed Anderson's face before his military discipline reasserted itself. "I've seen what they do to settlers. Men killed, women taken captive, children—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "My orders are to protect American citizens and maintain peace in the territory." "Peace maintained at gunpoint isn't peace, Lieutenant. It's submission." Their exchange was interrupted by a corporal approaching from the barn. "Sir, no sign of recent Indian activity. Appears the last visit was at least 3 days ago, based on the tracks." Anderson nodded, making a final notation in his book before tucking it away. "We'll be moving on, Miss Miller. But I should inform you that this area will be under increased patrol in the coming weeks, for your own protection, of course. The thinly veiled threat wasn't lost on Sarah. As the soldiers mounted up, Anderson delivered a parting observation. You seem like an intelligent woman. I hope you'll reconsider your associations before things become complicated. The frontier is changing. Those who can't adapt to civilization's advance will be left behind or removed. That's simply the way of progress. With that pronouncement, he led his men away, leaving Sarah standing in her dooryard, fists clenched at her sides. Only when they were well out of sight did she allow herself to tremble, not from fear, but from the force of her contained fury. The lieutenant's smug certainty, his unquestioning belief in the righteousness of civilization's advance at any cost, represented everything she had come to despise about the frontier's uglier aspects. Yet beneath her anger lay a deeper concern. If the army was gathering specific intelligence about individual Lakota, including Hanska, their planned operations were likely more targeted than general intimidation. And if they had informants within the tribes themselves, the Lakota were vulnerable in ways they might not fully comprehend. Sarah needed to warn Hanska, but how? His next visit was still weeks away, and she had no means of finding the Lakota camp on her own. For the first time, she truly understood the precarious position she occupied, trusted by neither side fully, yet caring deeply about what happened to both. As twilight gathered around her isolated cabin, Sarah made a decision. She would ride to Willow Creek at first light and send a letter to her cousin in Philadelphia. Margaret had been offering for years to fund a trip back east to civilization. Now, Sarah would appear to accept, creating the impression she was distancing herself from frontier life and any alleged native sympathies. It would provide cover for her real intention, to gather whatever information she could about the army's plans while reducing suspicion about her own activities. The game had become dangerous, the stakes impossibly high. Yet as Sarah prepared for bed that night, she found herself reaching for the Lakota flute, its music now a source of strength rather than mere practice. The melody that emerged spoke of resilience, of courage, and of a woman who had discovered that the true frontier wasn't the physical landscape around her, but the boundary between opposing worlds that she now straddled with increasing purpose. The letter to Cousin Margaret took several drafts before Sarah was satisfied. It needed to seem genuine, filled with the right blend of homesickness and frontier fatigue that would convince anyone who might intercept it. She agonized over each word, knowing that this deception was her first deliberate step into a far more complex game than simply offering shelter to an injured boy. "Dearest Margaret," she wrote in her final version, "your generous offer of passage home has been much on my mind as spring arrives in Dakota territory. While I have found certain satisfactions in frontier life, recent events have left me questioning my place here. Perhaps a visit east would provide welcome perspective." She sealed the envelope, along with a second letter to her former teacher in Philadelphia requesting information on nursing programs, another piece of her emerging cover story. By the time she rode into Willow Creek the next morning, Sarah had constructed an entire narrative about her disillusionment with pioneer life. Mr. Reynolds at the general store raised his eyebrows when she asked about eastbound mail. "Thinking of traveling, Miss Miller?" "Perhaps," Sarah replied with carefully crafted wistfulness. "I've family in Philadelphia who've been pressing me to visit." The news spread through town with predictable swiftness. By noon, several people had approached her with barely concealed satisfaction, offering comments like, "The frontier isn't for everyone, and sometimes home is the best place to heal." Sarah endured these remarks with a fixed smile, allowing the town to believe exactly what she intended. Thomas caught up with her as she loaded supplies into her wagon. "Is it true you're going back east?" "I'm considering my options," Sarah hedged, noting the conflict in his expression. Hope that she might stay battling with relief that the Indian problem in their midst might resolve itself with her departure. "This isn't because of how folks have been treating you, is it?" He lowered his voice. "Because that will pass, Sarah. People just need time." "It's more complicated than that." She secured a crate of preserves. "This land, it changes a person, Thomas. Makes you see things differently. All the more reason to stay," he argued, helping her with a heavy sack of flour. "This territory needs people with vision, people who can bridge the divide between the old ways and the new." Sarah studied him with newfound appreciation. Sometimes, Thomas surprised her with insights that transcended his conventional views. "That's a lovely sentiment, but I'm not sure everyone shares it." Their conversation was interrupted by two cavalry soldiers entering the general store. Sarah recognized one as the corporal who had accompanied Lieutenant Anderson to her cabin. The soldiers nodded curtly in her direction before engaging the storekeeper in conversation. Thomas noticed her tension. "They've been in town 3 days. Now, asking questions about Indian movements, recruiting scouts." He hesitated. "Anderson's been particularly interested in you." "Has he?" Sarah kept her voice neutral while her mind raced. "I've already told him everything I know." "He thinks there's more." Thomas glanced nervously at the soldiers. "Sarah, whatever you're mixed up in, be careful. Anderson's ambitious, making a name for himself in Indian affairs." When Sarah returned to her cabin that afternoon, she found evidence that visitors had come during her absence. Nothing was missing or disturbed, but Buck's behavior, his anxious circling and sniffing around the property, suggested recent activity. A careful inspection revealed boot prints too large for a Lakota beneath her kitchen window. Military issue, if she had to guess. The search had been professional, nothing obviously disturbed, though Sarah was certain someone had gone through her personal correspondence and the small trunk containing her father's military mementos. They had been seeking evidence of her communications with the Lakota, no doubt. That night, Sarah played the flute on her porch, the melancholy notes drifting across the darkening prairie. The music was partly for her own comfort, partly a signal, though, to whom she wasn't entirely certain. If Hanska or other Lakota scouts were watching her cabin, as she suspected, the sound would carry her unspoken message. "I remember. I remain your friend." For 2 weeks, Sarah maintained her deception. She made a show of sorting through possessions as if preparing for a long journey, mentioned Philadelphia in every conversation in town, and even asked Thomas about selling her livestock if I decide to go east for an extended period. Meanwhile, she observed, cavalry patrols increased, moving north toward Lakota territory with growing frequency. In the general store, she overheard fragments of information. A major campaign planned for early summer, additional troops expected from Fort Laramie, scouts being hired from among the local trappers and half-breeds familiar with Lakota territory. Most troubling were the whispers about friendlies, Lakota, who had accepted reservation life and were now helping the army locate the free bands still roaming the northern plains. Sarah thought of Hanska's warnings about War Eagle and the divisions among the Lakota. The situation was a powder keg with multiple fuses burning simultaneously. On a warm evening in late April, as Sarah worked in her garden, the sound of a single horse approaching drew her attention. She straightened, shading her eyes against the setting sun, her heart quickening at the familiar silhouette. Hanska dismounted with fluid grace, his expression serious but warm as he approached. "Sarah Miller, your garden grows well." Hanska. She resisted the urge to embrace him, suddenly aware of how much she had missed his presence. "I was worried. There are soldiers everywhere now. I know, they hunt us like wolves hunt deer." He glanced around the property, his scout's eyes taking in details she might have missed. "You have had visitors, military men. Lieutenant Anderson, and his patrol. They searched my cabin while I was in town. Sarah led him inside, where she had stew simmering over the fire. They're gathering information, Hanska. They know about you, about Akacheta. Specific details that could only come from someone within the Lakota. Hanska's face hardened. Yes, some of our people have chosen the reservation rather than fight. They think by helping the Blue Coats, they will be treated better. His voice held no condemnation, only a deep sadness. Hunger makes people forget. Old loyalties, they ate in companionable silence, the weight of unspoken concerns hanging between them. When they had finished, Sarah shared what she had learned in town, the build-up of cavalry, the planned summer campaign, the recruitment of scouts familiar with Lakota territory. War Eagle was right, Hanska said finally, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. The Wasichu never intended to honor their treaties. They only waited for enough soldiers, enough guns. Not all white people want war, Sarah protested. Many would prefer peaceful coexistence, but they are not the ones who make decisions. Hanska's gaze was steady. Just as among my people, the voices for peace grow fainter while the drums of war beat louder. He explained that Chief Akacheta continued to advocate for negotiation, but his influence was waning. 3 bands had already left to join War Eagle in the north, attracted by his promises to drive the white invaders from the sacred lands. Meanwhile, government agents visited the reservations, pressuring the Lakota there to convince their free relatives to surrender. What will your people do? Sarah asked. Akacheta has called council for the next full moon. All band leaders will gather to decide, fight or surrender. Hanska's expression revealed his internal conflict. My heart says fight, but my head sees the rifles, the cannons, the endless Wasichu soldiers. The intimacy of this confession, his willingness to share his doubts, touched Sarah deeply. And what does Akacheta counsel? He believes fighting means destruction, that we must find a way to preserve our people, our ways, even if we must bend to survive. Hanska sighed, the weight of impossible choices evident in his bearing. He is wise, but wisdom is cold comfort when your land is stolen. As night fell, they moved to the porch, where the first stars pricked the darkening sky. Sarah retrieved the flute, offering it shyly. I've been practicing. Hanska's smile transformed his solemn features. Show me. She played the simple melody she had mastered, her fingers now confident on the smooth wood. When she finished, Hanska nodded approvingly. You have found the voice of the flute. Now it speaks your heart. What does it say? Sarah asked, half teasing, half serious. Hanska gazed at her with unexpected intensity. That you stand between worlds, but belong to neither, that you seek a path not yet made. The perception in his words startled her. Is there such a path? I do not know, but if anyone can find it, it would be Sarah Miller. His hand reached out, hesitated, then gently touched a strand of hair that had escaped her bun. You have changed how I see Wasichu. Perhaps others can change too. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Sarah was acutely aware of his nearness, the warmth of his presence in the cool evening air. For a breathless instant, she thought he might lean closer, but instead he withdrew his hand, his expression turning grave. I must return to my people. Tomorrow, the council approaches and Akacheta needs all voices for peace. He hesitated, then continued with evident difficulty. What I ask now puts you in danger, but there is no one else. Ask, Sarah said simply. Akacheta wishes to speak with the military leader, this Lieutenant Anderson, to show him that we seek peace, not war, but we need a neutral place for such a meeting, a place neither Lakota nor Wasichu. Understanding dawned. My cabin. Hanska nodded. You stand between our worlds. Akacheta trusts you. Perhaps this Anderson would come if you invited him. The request was breathtaking in its implications and its danger. Hosting a peace talk between a Lakota chief and an army officer could be seen as treason by those in Willow Creek, perhaps even by the military itself. Yet it might be the only chance to prevent the bloodshed that seemed increasingly inevitable. "When?" she asked, making her decision. "5 days. When the quarter moon rises." Hanska studied her face, concern evident in his eyes. "This places you at great risk, Sarah Miller. I was at risk the moment I brought Chetan into my home," she replied with a wry smile. "Some choices set us on paths from which we cannot turn back." They spent the next hour discussing practicalities, how Sarah would approach Anderson, what assurances she could offer, how the Lakota delegation would arrive without being detected by army patrols. Throughout their planning, Sarah was struck by Hanska's strategic mind, his careful consideration of details that might never have occurred to her. As midnight approached, he reluctantly prepared to depart. The darkness would provide cover for his journey back to the Lakota camp, though the increased military presence made any movement dangerous. "There is one more thing," he said as he mounted his horse. "If I do not return with Akacheta in 5 days, it means I have been captured or killed." His voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of self-pity. "If this happens, you must forget us. Return to your Philadelphia. Live your Wasichu life." "I won't do that," Sarah said firmly. "I won't abandon your people." "You must," Hanska insisted. "You cannot help us if you are imprisoned as a traitor." The stark reality of their situation hung between them. After a moment, Hanska reached into his pouch and withdrew a small object that glinted in the moonlight. He extended his hand, offering it to Sarah. "This belonged to my mother. It protected her through many winters. Now it will protect you." Sarah accepted the gift, a pendant crafted from polished buffalo bone, etched with symbols she couldn't decipher but sensed were powerful. She slipped it over her head, the pendant settling against her heart. "I will treasure it," she promised. Hanska's eyes held hers for a long moment, conveying emotions too complex for words. Then, with a final nod, he turned his horse and disappeared into the darkness. The following morning, Sarah rode to Willow Creek with grim determination. Her plan was audacious, perhaps foolhardy, but she saw no alternative. Lieutenant Anderson needed to be convinced to meet with Akasheta, and she was the only bridge between their worlds. She found the lieutenant at the town's small hotel, where the cavalry officers had established temporary headquarters. When she requested a private word, Anderson's eyebrows rose in evident surprise. "Miss Miller, this is unexpected." He gestured to a chair opposite his makeshift desk, which was covered with maps and reports. "I understand you're contemplating a return to the east. News travels quickly in a small town," Sarah observed, taking the offered seat. "But that's not why I'm here." Anderson leaned back, studying her with open curiosity. "I'm listening." Sarah measured her words carefully, aware that what she was about to propose could be construed as far more than frontier eccentricity. "Lieutenant, you've made it clear that your mission is to prevent hostilities between settlers and the Lakota, to maintain peace in the territory." "That's correct," he replied cautiously. "What if I told you there's an opportunity to achieve that goal without bloodshed? To speak directly with a Lakota leader who commands respect among his people?" Anderson's expression sharpened. "You have contact with the hostiles." "I have contact with Lakota who want peace," Sarah corrected firmly. "Chief Akacheta is willing to meet with you to discuss terms that might prevent conflict. He's a reasonable man, Lieutenant, more reasonable than some who speak for the government." The officer's face remained impassive, but Sarah detected a flicker of interest in his eyes. "Where would this meeting take place?" "My homestead, 5 days from now, at dusk." Sarah maintained steady eye contact, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Neutral ground, with no military presence beyond yourself and perhaps one aide. Anderson drummed his fingers on the desk, his military mind obviously calculating risks and potential advantages. Why would I trust this offer? For all I know, it could be an ambush. Because it makes no tactical sense as a trap, Sarah replied. Logically, the Lakota gain nothing by harming a single officer when they face an entire army, and because my life would be forfeit as well, something neither side desires. Her straightforward assessment seemed to register with Anderson. He studied her with newfound respect, as if seeing beyond the frontier woman to the strategic thinker beneath. "You realize what you're proposing could be considered treasonous?" he said finally, facilitating unauthorized negotiations with hostile forces. "I'm proposing a chance to fulfill your mission without adding more graves to this territory," Sarah countered. "Surely that aligns with your orders." A long silence followed as Anderson weighed his options. Sarah waited, her future hanging on his decision. If he refused and reported her, she faced arrest at best, execution for treason at worst. If he accepted but planned to turn the meeting into an ambush, she would be responsible for delivering Akacheta into a trap. "Two conditions," Anderson finally said. "First, I bring 3 men, not 1. They remain outside but within call." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Agreed. And the second? You tell me everything you know about War Eagle and his followers. Not Akacheta's people, I'll hear his case directly, but the radical faction, their numbers, weapons, location, if you know it." The request struck at the heart of Sarah's dilemma. To betray any Lakota might prevent her from helping all of them. Yet, without this meeting, conflict seemed inevitable. "I have limited information," she said carefully. "But what I know I'll share, with the understanding that your goal is peaceful resolution, not military advantage." Anderson smiled thinly. "Miss Miller, in my experience, peace and military advantage are often the same thing." He extended his hand across the desk. "We have an arrangement." As Sarah rode home, the weight of what she had set in motion pressed upon her. She had committed herself irrevocably now. Trusted by the Lakota, but working with the army, straddling a chasm that could close around her with crushing force if either side decided she had betrayed them. The next 5 days passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Sarah cleaned her cabin thoroughly, arranged her modest furniture to accommodate the unusual gathering, and considered every detail that might help create an atmosphere conducive to peaceful negotiation. She also prepared herself mentally for all possible outcomes. If the meeting succeeded, perhaps a measure of peace could be preserved. If it failed, she needed to be ready to flee, not just from the territory, but from both societies that would label her a traitor. On the appointed evening, Sarah sat on her porch, watching the western sky flame orange and crimson as the sun descended. The quarter moon was already visible, a pale crescent in the darkening eastern sky. Within the hour, 2 separate parties would arrive at her remote cabin, their futures and hers, balanced on a knife's edge of possibility. Buck suddenly raised his head, ears alert. In the distance, Sarah could make out the steady approach of horses, military mounts moving with disciplined rhythm. Lieutenant Anderson had kept his word and was coming. As the soldiers appeared on the eastern trail, Sarah caught movement from the opposite direction. 3 mounted figures emerging, silently from the wooded northern approach. Even at a distance, she recognized Hanska's tall form, riding beside a figure adorned with the unmistakable headdress of Chief Akacheta. The paths of 2 worlds were converging at her doorstep. Sarah touched the bone pendant beneath her dress, drawing strength from its connection to Hanska's mother to a heritage of resilience. Then she rose to her feet, straightened her spine, and prepared to welcome both parties to what might be the most important and dangerous gathering of her life. Sarah stood in the space between the approaching parties, a solitary figure against the twilight sky. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. One woman positioned between two colliding worlds, attempting to forge a bridge where generations had built walls. Lieutenant Anderson dismounted first, his 3 soldiers remaining on horseback. As agreed, he approached with military precision, his expression guarded but curious. "Miss Miller." He nodded, then glanced toward the Lakota delegation. "I see our guests have arrived as well." From the northern approach, Chief Akacheta dismounted with dignified deliberation. Even without his full ceremonial attire, his presence commanded respect. Hanska and another warrior Sarah didn't recognize flanked him protectively. "Akacheta comes in peace," Sarah said quietly to Anderson. "Please remember that." The lieutenant straightened his uniform jacket. "I'm here to listen, not to fight." Sarah led them to her cabin, where she had arranged chairs around her modest table. A kettle of coffee simmered on the stove, filling the small space with its rich aroma. She had deliberately chosen coffee, a neutral beverage appreciated by both cultures, rather than traditional offerings from either side. The initial moments were tense, filled with ceremonial greetings and careful assessment. Chief Akacheta spoke first, his deep voice filling the cabin as Hanska translated. "I have lived 57 winters," the chief began. "I have seen the buffalo herds darken the plains. I have seen them vanish. I have seen treaties made and broken. I have buried warriors killed by bluecoat bullets, and I have counseled against revenge when young men cried for blood." Anderson listened attentively, his military bearing gradually softening as Akacheta spoke of his people's suffering, their diminishing hunting grounds, the children weakened by hunger on the reservations. "Yet I come not to speak of past wrongs," Akacheta continued, "but of future peace. War Eagle calls for battle, for driving the Wasichu back across the great river, but such dreams lead only to death." Sarah watched Anderson's reaction closely. The lieutenant had removed his hat, revealing thinning hair and a face younger than his rank suggested. As Akacheta spoke, she glimpsed something unexpected in Anderson's eyes. Not dismissal or condescension, but recognition. "My commanding officer believes force is the only language your people understand," Anderson finally responded. "General Sheridan has ordered all free bands to surrender by midsummer or face military action." Hanska's expression hardened as he translated, but Akacheta remained impassive, dignified. "And what does Lieutenant Anderson believe?" the chief asked. Directly, the question seemed to catch the officer off guard. He glanced at Sarah, then back to Akacheta. "I believe my duty is to carry out my orders with minimum bloodshed." "A careful answer," Akacheta observed, "but not a true one." An uncomfortable silence followed, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire. Outside, dusk had deepened into night, the quarter moon casting silver light through the cabin windows. "I fought at Washita River," Anderson suddenly said, his voice low. "I saw women and children cut down. Afterward, I was commended for bravery." His jaw tightened. "I have not slept well since." The admission hung in the air, unexpected and raw. Sarah realized she was witnessing something rare, a moment of genuine truth between enemies. "Then help me prevent another Washita," Akacheta urged. "My people will accept reservation life, but with conditions. Huntable lands where the old ways can continue. Our children taught by our own, not missionaries who forbid our language. Our sacred ceremonies permitted." "I don't have authority to negotiate such terms," Anderson protested. "But you have the ear of those who do," Hanska interjected, speaking English directly. "Your reports shape how your commanders see us." As the night deepened, the discussion evolved from cautious positioning to pragmatic possibilities. Anderson revealed that the Army's campaign was still in planning stages, with several senior officers unconvinced of its necessity. Lakota shared details of his struggle to maintain unity among the remaining free bands, with War Eagle's influence growing stronger each day. Sarah provided coffee and remained largely silent, recognizing that her role now was to witness rather than mediate. This conversation needed to unfold between the principals themselves. Near midnight, as the meeting drew to its natural conclusion, Lakota rose to his feet. "I will hold my people from War Eagle's path for 20 days. Time for your words to reach the proper ears." Anderson stood as well, straightening to attention. "And I will convey your terms accurately with my recommendation for consideration. It wasn't a treaty, it wasn't even a formal agreement, but in the context of decades of broken promises and escalating hostilities, it represented something precious. A fragile tendril of possibility, nourished by mutual respect. As the Lakota prepared to depart, Hanska lingered behind. "You have done a good thing this night, Sarah Miller." "We all have," she replied, "but it may not be enough. Sometimes a small stone can change a river's course." He glanced toward Anderson, who was conferring with his men outside. "This Wasichu, soldier, he carries wounds inside, like many of my people." "We all carry wounds," Sarah said softly. "Some are just more visible than others." Hanska's hand brushed hers briefly, the touch electric even in its brevity. "When this is finished, whatever comes, there is a place for you among the Lakota, if you choose it." The offer hung between them, charged with meaning that transcended words. Before Sarah could respond, Lakota called for Hanska, and the moment passed. Once the Lakota had vanished into the darkness, Lieutenant Anderson returned to bid Sarah farewell. His demeanor had shifted subtly, the rigid military bearing softened by the night's revelations. "You've placed yourself in an impossible position, Miss Miller," he observed. "Neither side will fully trust you now." "Perhaps trust isn't what's needed," Sarah replied. "Perhaps understanding is enough." Anderson studied her with newfound respect. "I'll do what I can with my superiors, but you should know, there are powerful interests that want this conflict. Gold in the Black Hills, railroad contracts, political aspirations built on solving the Indian problem once and for all. And where do your interests lie, Lieutenant?" He considered the question with surprising candor. 6 months ago, I would have given you the Army answer. Now, he glanced in the direction the Lakota had departed. Now I find myself hoping to avoid adding more ghosts to my dreams. After the soldiers departed, Sarah sat alone on her porch, too wired with tension to sleep despite the late hour. The meeting had gone better than she dared hope, yet the path ahead remained treacherous. Anderson might be sincere, but his superiors could overrule him. Lakota might hold his followers back, but War Eagle's influence could overwhelm him, and her own position had grown infinitely more precarious. If word reached Willow Creek about her role in this night's events, not even Thomas could shield her from the consequences. Yet beneath these anxieties lay a strange sense of peace. For the first time since finding Chetan in the snow, Sarah felt she had acted with full agency rather than simply responding to circumstances. Whatever came next, she had chosen her path with clear eyes. 20 days passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah maintained her cover story about preparations to return east, while secretly watching for any sign of military movement toward Lakota territory. Twice, Hanska visited briefly under cover of darkness, bringing word that Lakota was losing ground in his efforts to restrain the younger warriors. War Eagle's calls for resistance grew more compelling as reservation conditions worsened and promised government supplies failed to materialize. On the 20th day, Lieutenant Anderson himself rode to Sarah's cabin. His expression told her everything before he spoke a word. "My commanding officer rejected Lakota's terms," he said without preamble. "Campaign plans proceed. The 7th Cavalry moves north within the week. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the blow. And you, Lieutenant? I've requested transfer back east, he replied, surprising her. It was denied. Apparently, my understanding of the Indian situation makes me valuable to the campaign. The bitter irony in his tone confirmed what Sarah had sensed during the meeting. Anderson had been genuinely moved by Akacheta's dignity and reasoning. Another potential ally, neutralized by the machinery of conquest. What will you do? He asked. Sarah straightened her spine, decision crystallizing. Give warning where I can, then leave this territory. Anderson didn't pretend to misunderstand. They'll call it treason. And what would you call it? He considered this, his expression troubled. Humanity, perhaps. He mounted his horse. I never saw you, Miss Miller. This conversation never happened. You have 2 days before the patrols push north. After he departed, Sarah moved with swift efficiency. She packed only essentials, warm clothing, her father's compass, the bone pendant, from Hanska, the Lakota flute. Everything else, the cabin, the livestock, the small comforts she'd accumulated over 3 years, would remain behind. In Willow Creek, she left a letter for Thomas with the station master, explaining nothing, yet suggesting everything. Then she rode north, following landmarks Hanska had described, seeking the Lakota summer camp near the fork of the river. She found them as sunset painted the sky crimson, teepees arranged in the traditional circle, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing among the lodges. At her approach, warriors moved protectively forward, weapons ready. I seek Hanska, Sarah called out in the Lakota phrases Chetan had taught her. I bring warning. A familiar figure emerged from among the defenders, tall and commanding. Hanska's expression shifted from wariness to recognition, then to concern as he took in her travel-worn appearance. Sarah Miller, he said, coming forward to help her dismount. You have ridden far. The army moves north, she explained rapidly. Anderson couldn't stop it. They come in force, with orders to compel surrender. Runners were immediately dispatched to spread the warning. Sarah found herself ushered into the camp where Akacheta received her with grave courtesy. Mahi embraced her like a returning daughter, while Chetan, taller and more mature than when she'd last seen him, grinned with undisguised pleasure at her arrival. You cannot return now, Hanska said privately, after she had shared all her information with the chief's council. The Wasichu will know you warned us. I know. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I've made my choice. That night, as the Lakota prepared to break camp and move deeper into the territory, Hanska found Sarah sitting alone by a small fire, contemplating the flames. You have given up much, he observed, settling beside her. And gained more, she replied. She touched the flute hanging at her waist. You once said I stand between worlds but belong to neither. Perhaps that was true then. It isn't now. Hanska's hand found hers in the firelight, their fingers intertwining. And now? Sarah turned to face him fully, years of frontier reserve, falling away as she embraced the future she had chosen. Now I know where I belong. In the distance, drums began to beat, not the rhythms of war, but the steady pulse of a people preparing for a journey. The Lakota would move west, toward the mountains where army horses struggled to follow. They would survive this campaign, as they had survived others, adapting without surrendering, bending without breaking. And among them, a woman who had once been Sarah Miller of Philadelphia would find a new name, a new purpose. The bridge builder, the healer, the one who had crossed between worlds and chosen her path with open eyes and an open heart. Above, the quarter moon sailed through scattered clouds, casting silver light on the sprawling encampment as it prepared for departure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, But tonight, beside the dying embers of the fire, two people from different worlds found common ground in the most ancient language of all, the unspoken understanding between kindred spirits who had found each other against all odds. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us,